I never thought there would come a day when I'd wake up in my own house and realize that everyone I ever loved was gone. No footsteps down the hall, no smell of coffee, no quiet laughter from the kitchen. Just silence, the kind that presses against your chest until you can hear your own heartbeat. And then I saw it, a single note folded once lying on the kitchen table, scribbled in my daughter-in-law's handwriting. "Don't wait for us, Dad. We left early for Hawaii. You don't like flying anyway." Next to it was my spare credit card, the one they always said was for emergencies, now completely drained. I stood there for a long time watching the light creep across the counter, touch the note, and fade. I should have felt anger or sadness, but all I felt was empty. Last Thanksgiving, this same kitchen was full of warmth. I roasted a turkey, basted it with butter and thyme. My grandson Lucas stood on a stool beside me, holding the brush with both hands. He asked if talking to the turkey made it taste better. I said yes, because some things only work if you believe in them. Now the counters were spotless. The air smelled like metal and soap. No laughter, no warmth. Just a cup of cold coffee and a mug that read, "World's Best Dad." I smiled, not because I believed it, but because I used to. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We share real stories every day, stories of family betrayal and the quiet kind of justice that comes when the noise dies down. If you're here, leave a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? My name is Stephen Cole, 69 years old, retired attorney, former investigator for the Oregon Department of Justice. For 3 decades, I believed the law could protect people. That truth, when spoken clearly enough, would always be heard. But I forgot something. Some wounds never make it into the case files. Some betrayals leave no fingerprints. And the deepest crimes are committed at the dinner table. When my wife Eleanor passed from cancer, I sold our house in Salem, packed everything myself. Her winter coat still smelled like lavender and rain. I used the insurance money, $180,000, to help my son David and his wife Laura buy a new home in Portland. It felt right, a new start, a promise to keep the family close. David hugged me and said, "You'll never have to live alone again, Dad." I held on to that sentence, because back then it still meant something. The first year was good. We had dinner together every night. I taught Lucas how to build a birdhouse, fixed the porch railings, planted lavender out front, Eleanor's favorite. Laura talked about her influencer work, David about his clients. And I just listened, proud and quiet. But slowly, things began to change. Laura started filming everything, 3 generations under one roof. That was her project. Her phone was always recording the kitchen, the living room, the yard. One afternoon, I accidentally knocked over a vase while she was live streaming. She smiled for the viewers, kept her voice sweet. But when the camera stopped, she said coldly, "Could you please stay out of the frame next time? It ruins the background." That was the day I stopped feeling like family and started feeling like furniture. Then came the finances. David said, "Dad, let me manage your bank account. It's easier. I don't want you to forget about the bills." I trusted him because he was my son, because I wanted to believe that loyalty was something you could inherit. But trust is a currency easily spent by the wrong hands. That morning I woke up at 6 out of habit, made coffee, turned on the AM radio. The host was talking about gratitude, his voice too cheerful, too far from where I was. I looked out the window. The Portland sky was heavy and gray. The cold air pressed against the glass. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Like it had been waiting for this day to come. Next to the note, I saw a set of car keys, the ones I'd given David on his wedding day. I told him then, when you have a family, take them somewhere special. And now he had. Just not with me. I sat down, coffee cooling in my hands. The clock ticked. Each sound felt like a reminder. You've been left behind. On the wall hung our family photo, David, Laura, Lucas, and me standing a little too far from the center. I reached out, touched the glass. Cold, smooth, unforgiving. I taught my son the difference between right and wrong, I whispered, but I never taught him how to honor the man who taught him that. I opened the window. The wind came in damp, cold reel. Across the street, a crow sat on the power line, silent still, like it understood what it was witnessing. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's TV played softly laughter football, a voice saying, "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone." And I thought maybe happiness was never mine to begin with, because all I had left was a note. You don't like flying anyway. Those words echoed in my head. They weren't wrong. I did hate flying. Always have. But they used it as an excuse. A way to leave without guilt. That's how betrayal works. It always finds something true to hide the lie behind. I turned the radio up. Another host talked about being thankful. He laughed between sentences. The sound felt plastic, distant. I smiled faintly. Gratitude, that word used to mean something to me. I taught it to every intern I ever trained. Never forget who held the door open for you. Now it was just another word people said before carving a turkey. I picked up the note again. Laura's handwriting leaned forward, as if running away from her own guilt. The ink had smudged like she'd written it in a hurry. No love you, Dad. No happy Thanksgiving. Just 2 words that sealed everything. Don't wait. The sunlight slid across the table, illuminating the last line. You don't like flying anyway. I stared at it for a long time. That wasn't an excuse. It was a sentence, an ending signed in my absence. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. They thought they'd left me behind. But what they really did was wake me up. They unlocked the part of me I'd buried, the one that understands patience, timing, and quiet consequences. On the day everyone gave thanks, I sat alone with a cold cup of coffee and a piece of paper colder than the wind outside. And that's when I knew nothing in this house, not the walls, not the memories, not even the love, would ever be the same again. When I looked at that handwritten note on my kitchen table that morning, something inside me died. The rest of me just wanted to understand why. But to understand, I had to go back to where it all began. It was the summer of 2020. Salem was drenched in sunlight, and I had just become a widower. Eleanor was gone. She passed in June. The house we'd lived in for 35 years suddenly felt too big, too quiet. Every room carried an echo, her laughter, her perfume, the soft clink of teacups we never got to share again. I remember the morning she died. I sat in the kitchen staring at the newspaper left open on the table. The headline read, "New Dawn Realty expands in Portland." I don't know why, but something about that line felt like a warning. A whisper that change was coming. 2 months after the funeral, David showed up. White shirt, confident smile. He stood in the doorway and said softly, "Dad, Laura and I are buying a place in Portland. You should sell this house and come live with us. It'll be easier, less lonely." I looked at my son. He stood taller than me now, his eyes the same color as Eleanor's. And I said yes. Because I didn't have the strength to say no. Because keeping him close felt like keeping her alive. I sold the Salem house. collected Eleanor's life insurance $180,000, and wired it straight to David to help buy their new home in Portland. The contract said, joint ownership Stephen Cole and David Cole. I remember signing it thinking not of loss, but of beginning again. It was raining when I moved in. Portland rain, soft, endless gray. Laura greeted me with a perfect smile, the kind that looked practiced, not felt. The house was beautiful. White walls, walnut floors. The air smelled like new paint and expensive candles. David put his arm around me. See Dad, bright, open space for everyone. I nodded, and somewhere inside something small and quiet hesitated. But I pushed it away. Don't be suspicious, Stephen, I told myself. They're your family. That first night, Laura poured champagne. To a new home, she said, and new beginnings. I smiled, raised my glass, and for a brief, fragile moment, I believed I'd done the right thing. The first few months were peaceful. Laura cooked. David worked. I tended the garden. Every morning, little Lucas ran into my room shouting, "Grandpa, let's plant flowers." We built a small wooden birdhouse together, just like I once did with David when he was 8. For a moment, I could almost feel Eleanor there, watching, smiling somewhere between the sunlight and the breeze. Sometimes I'd stand on the porch, look at the lavender swaying in the wind, and think I kept my promise. I kept this family together. But then, the cracks began to show. They didn't start with arguments. They started quietly, in the spaces between conversations. One evening, Laura said, "Dad, I have an online meeting tonight. Could you turn the TV off?" The sound carries through the mic. I did. Sat in the dark listening to her laugh through the wall. Not at me, not with me, just near me. Then she started filming videos, family clips, home tours, a day in the life. Everything had to be neat, bright, perfect, even me. "Dad, wear a lighter shirt, okay. I'm shooting a video about 3 generations living happily together." I did what she asked. Because if it made them happy, why not? But one day I overheard her on the phone laughing. Having an old person in the house gives the video such a cozy vibe. Not my father-in-law, not Grandpa, just an old person. It was small, but it cut deep. Because that's how it starts. They stop saying your name. Then they stop seeing you at all. Money came next. One afternoon I asked David's son how much is left in the joint account. He smiled. "Don't worry, Dad. I've got it handled. It's easier if I take care of everything." I hesitated. "But the mortgage documents, I haven't seen the originals." He waved his hand. "Dad, I'm in real estate. Trust me." And I did. Because I still wanted to. Because I thought blood was stronger than ink. Because I believed foolishly that family was the only contract that didn't need signatures. I was wrong. Time passed. Laura began controlling smaller things. She changed the Wi-Fi password, had all the bills sent to her email. Slowly, every document, every account, every decision passed through their hands, not mine. One October evening, I was painting a small patch in the garage. Laura walked in, her tone sweet but sharp. "Dad, could you not paint in here? I have a brand shoot tomorrow morning." I lowered the brush. The air was thick with fresh paint. She opened a window, waved her hand. "Ugh, that smell is awful." Then she walked out. I looked at the wall, half painted, half bare, and realized something. That wall was me, half belonging, half erased. I started sleeping less. At night, I'd hear their footsteps upstairs, the sound of a door closing, the click of a keyboard, and a quiet fear began to bloom inside me. Not fear of being yelled at, but fear of being invisible, of becoming a shadow in a home I helped build. One morning I came downstairs. The dining table was spotless. A new family photo hung on the wall. Laura, David, Lucas. I wasn't in it. I stood there for a long time, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood I hadn't been pushed out. I had been quietly replaced. No one told me to leave. They simply stopped remembering I existed. David started coming home late. He'd pat my shoulder as he passed. "You doing okay, Dad? I've got another client meeting." And he'd walk right by like I was the neighbor. Laura was always traveling brand campaigns, photo shoots, events. I didn't complain. I just sat on the porch in the evenings listening to the garage door close and remembering when I taught David how to drive in an empty parking lot 30 years ago. He was so proud that day. Said, "One day, Dad, I'll take care of you the same way you take care of me." Funny how promises fade faster than paint. One night I opened the cabinet to get some documents and found an envelope labeled "Mortgage Renewal, Confidential." I asked David, "What's this about?" He answered quickly, "Oh, just a refinance. I've got it handled. Don't worry about it." That phrase, "don't worry," hit me harder than I expected, because after 30 years in law enforcement, I knew one thing the moment someone tells you not to worry. That's exactly when you should. I went back to the garage, sat on the old wooden chair I'd built myself. The air still carried that faint smell of paint. On the shelf sat a small tin of wood polish, the same one I used years ago when I restored Eleanor's writing desk. I opened it. The scent took me back. I could almost hear her voice saying, "Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in something you built with your own hands." I looked around. 4 walls. White. Clean. Empty. Just the way Laura liked it, perfect for the camera. There was no trace of me anymore except for that old chair and the half-empty tin of polish. I took a deep breath. And in that stillness, something cold and clear settled inside me. I realized the truth. I wasn't a guest in this house. I was the man who had paid to be erased from his own life. They didn't rob me with weapons. They did it with smiles, with gentle words, and with the kind of forgetfulness that feels deliberate. They didn't need to push me out. All they had to do was stop seeing me. When people betray you, they rarely start with a knife. They start with a smile, a gentle tone, a sentence that sounds like kindness and usually arrives right when you finally believe everything is fine again. It was the week before Thanksgiving. David came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. He spoke softly, pleasant as always. "Dad, you should rest this year. Let us handle everything. You've done enough." I looked up a bit surprised. "You sure I was thinking of cooking the turkey again?" He smiled. "No need. We've got it covered. This year's going to be special." I nodded. And for the first time in a long while, I thought maybe my son wants to give back. I didn't know that at that very moment the storm had already begun to form. In the days that followed, the house began to feel different. Laura moved through it like a stranger. She cleaned, organized, rearranged, but never smiled. She inspected the rooms the way a realtor does before a showing. Not like a woman in her home, but like someone preparing to leave. Sometimes I heard her on the phone, her voice low, quick, precise. "Yes, the tickets are confirmed. 4 seats, but we'll only use 3. 4 seats, 3 passengers." I didn't ask. I'd spent my life interrogating suspects, but in a family, silence can feel kinder than truth. Or at least, it used to. One afternoon, Lucas ran into my room, holding a red ball, smiling. "Grandpa, is Hawaii far away?" I froze my hand, still on my glasses. "Hawaii, who told you about Hawaii, Mom and Dad? They said you don't like flying, so you'll stay home." For a few seconds, the world stopped. I heard the wind whistle through the doorframe. The ball slipped from his hands, rolled across the floor, and stopped at my feet. I bent down, picked it up slowly, and said softly, "You know, buddy, Hawaii's very far away, but sometimes people drift apart without moving an inch." He didn't understand. He just laughed and ran off the way children do before the world ever teaches them cruelty. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, a single lamp glowing in the corner. Outside, the rain tapped the roof, steady, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. Upstairs, light still leaked from David and Laura's room. I opened my phone more to distract myself than anything else. Then I saw it. A notification from my bank app. Payment processed. $4,126 USD. Honolulu travel. I stared at the screen. The charge came from my supplementary card, the one Laura used for emergencies. The transaction was time-stamped 11:42 p.m. The name Laura Cole. 4 tickets purchased. 3 passengers listed. My name wasn't one of them. I sat there in silence, watching the number 4126 burn into the glass. Outside, rain fell harder. Inside, everything went completely still. I opened the Ring camera app, the one mounted by the front door. The footage loaded. Laura appeared, umbrella tucked under her arm, speaking to 2 movers in uniform. One asked, "Where should we put this chair, ma'am?" Laura pointed, casual. "Take everything out. This one goes to storage." The chair they were carrying was the one I built for Eleanor in 1994. A simple wooden chair, walnut finish, hand-carved arms. She used to sit in it every afternoon on the porch, reading in the sunlight. I watched the footage, and for the first time in years, my hands began to tremble. Then Laura spoke again. Her voice was clear, steady. "That big box over there, the one labeled Stevens Tools, take that too." My name echoed through the speaker. Cold. Hollow. Like hearing your own eulogy. She signed the form, smiled faintly, and walked back inside. The camera timed out. The last frame froze my old toolbox sitting in the driveway, getting soaked in the rain. No surprise ever begins with someone carrying your belongings out of your own home. The next morning, Laura acted as though nothing had happened. She opened the fridge, poured milk, smiled. "You're up early, Dad. I'm planning to rearrange the living room today. You should rest a bit." I nodded. Didn't say a word. Behind her, new photos lined the wall. Laura, David, Lucas. Just 3 people. The space where the old family portrait had hung, the one that included me, was now empty. That afternoon, David came home, carrying 2 new suitcases. "Travel plans?" I asked. He smiled quickly. "Work trip. Maybe a bit of vacation, too." "Don't worry about it. Don't worry." The phrase that had once meant comfort now sounded like a verdict. But this time his voice wavered. And in his eyes I saw something almost human: guilt. That night I sat in the garage. The boxes they'd pushed aside were stacked in the corner. On one of them, the word Stevens Tools had been crossed out in black marker. Above it, a new label, storage only. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed, quietly, bitterly. Storage only. 2 words more honest than any of their smiles. Because that's what I had become, an old item kept in the house out of obligation, moved to storage when it didn't fit the decor. They didn't erase me all at once. They did it gently, beautifully. so that even the act of forgetting looked like love. Rain hit the roof harder. I didn't move, didn't cry. Then my phone buzzed again. Your credit balance is now below $50. I closed my eyes. I didn't need more proof. The evidence was complete. Every detail precise. Every betrayal intentional. I had been removed carefully, deliberately from my own life. Step by step, word by word, transfer by transfer. I stood turned on the garage light. The yellow glow reflected off the old circular mirror on the wall. I looked at my own face, deep lines, tired eyes. And yet beneath the fatigue there was something else, resolve. Something they hadn't erased. I whispered, "Go ahead, David. Take your trip. You think you've left behind an old man, someone too tired to fight. But you've forgotten something." I paused. The rain outside grew louder, heavier. Men who once understood the law also know how to make justice return without ever raising their voice. I turned off the light. The screen went black. Only the sound of rain remained, filling the silence like a slow confession. On the workbench, my phone still glowed. The Honolulu travel receipt shone faintly in the dark, the word confirmed, blinking in blue like a wound trying to close. That night they thought I was asleep. But the truth is, I had just woken up. I didn't sleep that night. The rain outside tapped against the roof in an even rhythm, steady, cold, relentless. I sat in the garage, staring at the dim yellow light, reflecting off the boxes where someone had crossed out Stephen's tools. It was a room full of my past, a warehouse of quiet ghosts. And somewhere inside that clutter, I knew there was still one piece of my life they hadn't touched yet. In the corner sat a small metal cabinet, its padlock rusted and stiff. I had to use pliers to twist it open. Inside was a silver box, its paint chipped, the lid worn smooth by time. A faded label in Eleanor's handwriting, "Private." I hadn't opened it since the day she died. I set it on the table. The hanging light flickered, casting reflections across the metal surface. My hands trembled slightly as I unlatched the clasp. Click. A small sound, but it echoed inside me like a door unlocking the past. Inside were old photographs, a few letters, and one folded sheet of paper. I opened it. Her handwriting was still soft, even graceful. "If the day ever comes when I'm no longer here, don't sign anything our son gives you until you've read it carefully. Not because I don't trust him, but because this world can change a person faster than love can save them." I sat there silent. I remembered that day, the day she wrote this letter. We'd argued about David's plan to take a business loan. I'd defended him. She'd shaken her head and said quietly, "You've taught him law, Stephen, but you never taught him honesty." I'd laughed, then told her she was being paranoid. Now her words felt like a hand on my shoulder, gentle but heavy enough to stop my breath. I went through the stack of property documents, each page a piece of time, each line a record of who I used to be. And then I saw it. Top corner, small printed note, revised, August 2023. My stomach turned cold. I unfolded the sheet. My name, Stephen Cole, was crossed out in red ink. Below it, clean and printed, owner David Cole. I stared at the page. Every letter felt like a knife carving through silence. Slow, deep, bloodless, but suffocating all the same. I opened my email, scrolled through the bank notifications. In the updates folder buried 3 months back, there it was: refinance completed. Signer Stephen Cole. I read it again and again. Each time the words made less sense. Refinance completed. Signer Stephen Cole. I whispered to myself, barely breathing, I never signed anything. I opened my laptop, logged into the online portal. There it was, an image of my digital signature. A thin, rigid line. Too straight. Too clean. Almost right. But not mine. It mimicked my hand perfectly, almost perfectly. But to someone who's signed hundreds of contracts over 30 years in the Department of Justice, it was clear. It was an imitation. Then I remembered. Months ago, David had asked me how to use the electronic signing tool. I'd shown him patiently, step by step. He'd laughed, said, "You're so meticulous, Dad." And now the knowledge I gave him was the tool he used to erase me from my own home. I sat back staring at the screen. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world was silent again. The blue light from the monitor reflected on my face, and for a moment, I saw two men in the glass, the man who once believed in the law, and the man the law had just betrayed. I printed every email, every document, every record. The printer hummed softly, spitting out sheets like quiet confessions. Each page a piece of evidence in a crime nobody thought needed hiding. When it finished, I stacked the papers, neatly slipped them into a black case, and locked it. On the wall hung Eleanor's photo taken in 2003. She was laughing, squinting at the sun, a cup of mint tea in her hand. I looked up at her and said quietly, "You were right. The dead do see more clearly than the living." I put on my coat, stepped outside. The sky had lightened gray, giving way to pale gold. The street glistened from the rain, and my shadow stretched long and thin fawn across the wet pavement. I looked up. The air was crisp, peaceful. No one would ever guess that I had just been erased from my own life. But I knew. And I also knew, once the law becomes a weapon, justice is just a matter of who holds the pen. I walked back inside. The wooden floor creaked beneath my steps, each sound a small reminder of who paid for every beam and nail in this house. I sat down at my desk and opened my old law notebook, pages, yellowed edges curled. I flipped to the section on property refinancing and forgery. My handwriting filled the margins, annotations, statutes, precedents. They were no longer theories. They were lifelines. The only rope I had left to pull myself back into existence. Part of me wanted to call David right then, to ask him why, to hear the lie straight from his mouth. But I didn't. Because I knew what he'd say. And I didn't want to sign anything else, not even another conversation. I didn't need confrontation. I needed proof. And now, I had the first piece. I opened the drawer and took out Eleanor's old journal, set it beside the evidence file. The paper had yellowed. The ink had faded. But her words still carried weight. I added a single line beneath her last entry. "You were right, Eleanor. They're doing what I never believed they could." Then I closed the metal box, locked it tight. Click. A short, firm sound, like a heart closing a door for the last time. They say death ends everything, but they're wrong. The dead don't disappear. They wait quietly, patiently, until the living are finally still enough to hear them speak. The light from the window fell across the word private. Dust floated upward in the beam, soft golden suspended. The printer whirred again, went behind me, spitting out one last sheet, another quiet piece of evidence in the story of my own erasure. Some mornings in Portland are so quiet you can hear the leaves fall. That morning was one of them only. This time I knew my life had turned down a road that didn't loop back. The file I'd printed through the night still sat on the kitchen table. My name crossed out. The forged signature sitting there silent, but big enough to fill the whole house. I finished the last of my cold coffee, put on my heavy coat, and carried the briefcase to Richard Bennett's place, my neighbor and an old friend. Richard had been a civil attorney at the Multnomah County office. We'd met in 1988, both of us rookies working our first property fraud case. He once told me, "People can steal your money, Stephen. Don't ever let them steal your name." I understand that sentence now in a way I wish I didn't. His house was 3 doors down. The oak door swung open, and there he was, silver hair, reading glasses, a cup of hot tea in his hand. "Stephen, been a while. I need you to look at something," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. We sat in his study between tall, dusty shelves and the familiar scent of old paper. I placed the file on the desk. Richard opened it, slid his glasses up, and read slowly. Morning light came in slantwise and sharpened the lines in his face. Those eyes, tired from decades of law, were still unnervingly sharp. After a while, he closed the folder and exhaled. "Stephen, unless I'm blind, this is refinance fraud, a forged signature on a refi." I said nothing. He looked straight at me. "Do you have the transfer receipt from 2020? I kept it. $180,000, direct from Eleanor's life insurance." Richard nodded. The light in his eyes hardened. "Then listen. If you have that proof, you're still a legal co-owner. Oregon law doesn't abandon people with evidence, only people who won't use it." The sentence pulled me up from a deep place. I hadn't lost everything. Not if I fought back with the very thing they used to betray me, the law. I told him the whole story. The note on the kitchen table, the Ring camera, the line that said, "Signer Stephen Cole." He listened without interrupting, only nodding now and then. When I finished, he spoke quietly. "I've seen children do cruel things to parents over money. But few do it with this level of polish. David's not stupid. He knows how to make fraud look clean. He just didn't expect you to understand the law even better than he does." I stared down at the cup of tea on the desk, the steam turning the air soft and blurry the way trust looks when it's dying. Before I left, Richard added, "I'm not saying this to comfort you, but you're lucky. Many people only find out when the house is already in foreclosure, when it's the police at the door, not a neighbor." I almost smiled. Maybe for the first time in my life, I'm grateful my loneliness kept me alert. That afternoon, I walked back home. A thin sun broke through after days of rain. It didn't warm anything. It only made the edges of things too clear to ignore. The lawn was patchy with mud. Beside the mailbox, a thick envelope had been left at the wrong address. To Laura Cole, the handwriting said. In the corner, Henderson Financial Services. I picked it up, intending to return it. But through the window in the envelope, I caught a line that made my heart stop. "Overdue payment. Foreclosure notice." I stood still for a long beat. Richard's words echoed in my head. Many only learn the truth when the police knock. A woman's voice called behind me. "Oh, I think that was dropped at your place by mistake." I turned. Nancy Whitmore stood by the fence, a laundry basket in her arms, widowed 3 cats. The kind of neighbor who notices things because she has the time and the heart to notice. "Thanks, Nancy," I said. "I'll make sure they get it." She hesitated. "Mr. Cole, I'm sorry to be direct, but I've seen a lot of unfamiliar cars at your place lately. A bank truck, too. I thought maybe you were selling." I kept my face calm. Inside, everything fell through the floor. Not selling. Refinancing. Behind my back. I carried the envelope inside and opened it. Red stamp across the top, final notice. Payment overdue. Borrower, David Cole. Property address, the house I was standing in. At the bottom, in bold, property subject to foreclosure in 45 days. I read each line again like tracing a scar I didn't want, but couldn't forget. They hadn't just taken my name off the deed. They had mortgaged the house built with my money and my dead wife's. I sat down the envelope, crumpling between my hands. On the wall, the clock kept its steady, indifferent beat, the only sound in a room where everything else had stopped. I thought of David, the boy who squeezed my hand across the street when he was 6. The boy who once said, "I'll take care of you when you're old, Dad." He didn't just leave me behind. He was digging up the foundation of the house I paid to build. I stood and looked out the window. My reflection stared back, an old man who no longer believed in anything but evidence. "I thought I'd only lost a family," I said to the empty room. "It turns out I almost lost a roof." The last of the light fell across the yellow envelope on the table, foreclosure notice stamped in hard red, my shadow laid over it like a silent oath that this wasn't over. That night I filed the notice with the rest of the evidence. Then I opened my laptop and sent Richard an email. Subject line, "We'll fight back." No speech, no drama. I knew what had to be done, because I'd learned something bitter and clean. Sometimes justice isn't in the courtroom. Sometimes it's in the hands of the person the system tried to grind down and couldn't. There are nights when silence speaks its own language. That night, it spoke fluently. Outside, Portland's air was sharp enough to sting. Wind rushed through the maples along the porch, their bare branches scraping the window pane with a sound so thin and metallic it almost rang. I sat alone in the living room, lights off, the glow from my phone cutting a single circle of pale light across my hands. The house was too still. Even the heater had given up humming. Then the screen lit up. FaceTime, Laura. I hesitated, then pressed accept. Sunlight exploded across the screen. Hawaii, bright blue, endless. Palm trees bending in warm wind waves, glittering behind her like glass. Laura's hair caught the light gold against gold. Behind her, David leaned into the frame, skin sun-tanned, holding a cocktail with a tiny paper umbrella. They looked radiant, carefree. They looked like the people they always wanted to be, and nothing like the ones I remembered. Dad, Laura's voice bubbled through the speaker, so cheerful it scraped. "You doing okay back home? It must be freezing. We're melting out here. It's heaven." David lifted his drink, laughing. "Don't forget dinner, old man. Heard Portland's getting a snowstorm soon." Their joy filled the screen, too loud, too bright. It was almost merciful when I heard my own voice, low, steady. "Yeah," I said. "It's cold, but I think I'm about to feel warm again." Laura blinked. "What was that, Bavus?" I said softly. "Enjoy the trip." She smiled, raised her glass toward me. "You know you hate flying anyway. We'll bring you something nice, promise." Then the image froze, waves caught mid-curl, smiles paused in sunlight, and vanished into black. The room returned to its natural state, dark, soundless, heavy. Only my reflection stared back from the dead screen, a quiet man, cold but no longer numb. Morning. Black Friday. While the city chased bargains, I made my own list. Not of things to buy, of things that still belong to me. At 7 sharp, a moving truck pulled up. Diesel engine idling, the sound echoing down the empty street. The foreman stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Cole." "You want all this loaded?" I nodded and handed him a folder typed, numbered, dated. He flipped through. Samsung 65-inch TV, purchased 2021, $1,299. Walnut dining table, custom build, Salem, 1. Brother sewing machine, gift to Laura, $320. Every line a receipt. Every receipt a confession. He frowned. "Sir, are you sure some of this looks practically new?" I met his eyes. "Everything I paid for, I take. Everything I didn't, they can keep." Something in my tone made him stop asking questions. He turned and began giving orders to his crew. The house filled with noise wood scraping against tile boxes, thudding clothes, the whine of wheels rolling across hardwood. Outside, a wind gust rattled the gutters. Inside, my past was being packed into cardboard. Every sound was a heartbeat of departure. I walked the rooms slowly, each step tracing 30 years of ownership. Where David and Laura's wedding photo once hung was now only a faint square of cleaner paint. A ghost frame. On the shelf, the barbecue knife caught my eye, Cole Family BBQ 2021 etched into the handle. My gift to my son. I picked it up. Metal caught the light. And suddenly I was back there a summer afternoon, the smell of smoke and rosemary. I could hear Lucas's laugh, see him running through the yard with paper wings taped to his arms. Laura filmed it all for her followers, laughing. "Best dad ever," she'd said on camera. For a moment, I believed it again before memory cooled back into metal in my hand. Another room, another ghost. The sewing machine I bought her still sat near the window. I remembered stitching curtains with her once because she'd said, "The windows look too empty, Dad. Help me make it homey." I'd smiled, hemmed the fabric, said nothing. Now the windows were bare again. Maybe that's what honesty looks like, bare glass, no decoration. By 9, the house had changed shape. It no longer felt like a home. It felt like an exhibit, artifacts of a father. Boxes gone, sound gone, even the smell was different. I stood in the kitchen where the air once smelled of cinnamon and coffee. The counter gleamed, stripped clean. Absence gleams more than polish ever could. When the movers finished loading, I went down to the garage. Dust floated in thin shafts of sunlight cutting through the cracks of the old door. Tools lined the walls, quiet, loyal things. I reached for the can of polish oil, and there behind it saw a small box wrapped in navy paper, a ribbon still tied tight. The label read, "To Dad, from Stephen. Happy birthday, David." For a second, I forgot to breathe. Inside, a photograph, taken in 2008. Eleanor, me, David, young, sweating, laughing, repainting the old Salem house. Faces smudged with streaks of blue and white. On the back, my handwriting. "If you ever forget where you began, remember your father painted the first coat. He'd never opened it. 17 years of dust proved that." I put it back on the shelf, not because I couldn't take it, but because it belonged here with the version of him who still smiled that way. Some truths should stay exactly where they stopped being lies. By 10 o'clock, silence had replaced everything. No chairs, no table, just echoes. In the center of the kitchen lay one last thing, a note left by Laura the morning they flew to Hawaii. "Don't wait for us. You don't like flying anyway." I stared at it for a long time, then found a roll of tape, pressed it flat against the bare wooden table, and picked up a pen. Beneath her neat, tilted handwriting, I wrote slowly, each stroke deliberate. "Thank you for teaching me that silence is also a right." I stepped back. 2 handwritings, hers soft and looping, mine steady, sharp. Sunlight from the window stretched across the paper, dividing the lines like a horizon, one world of denial and another of truth. For the first time in years, I felt balanced. Outside, the truck engine idled low. I pulled the door shut behind me. The cold air hit my face like water. Leaves scraped across the driveway. Their sound was brittle, final. The driver called, "Where to, Mr. Cole?" I glanced down the street, empty, quiet, ordinary. A street that had watched me lose everything, and now would watch me leave with what still mattered. "Take me somewhere," I said, "where the law still means something." He nodded once. The truck rumbled forward, slow and heavy wheels grinding against wet asphalt. Through the rear window, my house shrank, the shape of a memory fading into the Portland mist. People think loss makes you weaker. They're wrong. Loss strips you bare, and sometimes what's left underneath is the part that can finally stand upright. Sometimes loss gives you back the one thing betrayal takes: first, freedom. Back inside that house, though, I'd never step into it again. The paper still lay on the table. 2 sentences, 2 worlds. You don't like flying anyway. Silence is also a right. One written in comfort, one written in clarity. Between them, a sliver of blank white, a quiet border between false warmth and earned cold. The last light of the morning touched both lines at once, and for the first time they didn't clash. They simply ended. Some mornings begin with silence. Others begin with a ringing phone, the sound of truth knocking at your door. That morning, Portland was wrapped in fog. I was living in a small rented room near the Willamette River. A folding table served as my desk, on it stacks of old files, a travel-sized printer, and the black briefcase holding everything I'd gathered these past weeks. When the phone rang, I almost ignored it, thinking it was another spam call. But then I saw the name on the screen: Oregon State Bank, Mortgage Department. I hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was polite, practiced, one of those tones trained to sound human without feeling human. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. We're calling to verify your voice authorization for the refinance agreement signed on August 8th of last year." My hand tightened around the phone. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "Repeat that." "Yes, sir. According to our records, you confirmed the transaction via recorded call. We just need to revalidate before finalizing your payment schedule." I laughed, short, dry, humorless. I never signed, and I never called. Silence stretched across the line, a digital pause that hummed faintly like static guilt. Then the voice said, "In that case, sir, perhaps you should listen to this recording." A few minutes later, an email arrived. I opened it. The audio began with a hiss of static, then a voice. My voice. "This is Stephen Cole. I agree to the refinance file number 482709A. My stomach turned to stone. It sounded exactly like me, the same rhythm, the same low rasp, even the slight catch in breath at the end of each phrase. But it wasn't me. It was too perfect, too smooth. Like a reflection speaking without a pulse. A voice that knew how to mimic sound, but not how to carry a soul. I sent the file to Richard. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in his office. Morning light cut through the blinds, splitting his face between gold and shadow. He listened to the file twice, then removed his glasses and let out a long, slow breath. "Stephen, this isn't a real recording." He turned the monitor toward me, pointing at the digital sound wave graph. "It's voice forgery. A synthetic clone. New tech, they can model anyone's tone, inflection, breathing pattern. To the ear, it's flawless, but the frequency base gives it away. It's not human." My throat felt dry. "Can you prove it?" He nodded. "I can. But it'll take time. And I'll need a clean sample, your actual voice. Video, preferably, with your statement on record." That afternoon, I walked 2 blocks to Nancy's house, the same neighbor who once handed me the foreclosure letter by mistake. She opened the door, wearing her beige sweater, the one that always smelled faintly of lavender and cat fur. Her smile was small but steady. "Richard called," she said. "Said you might need a favor." "I do," I replied. "Do you have a phone that records video?" She laughed. "Of course. I film my cats all day." For the first time in weeks, I smiled back. Good. Because today, we're not filming cats. We're filming the truth. We cleared her dining table, set up the phone on a small stand. The window light was soft, muted gold, the kind that flatters nothing and hides even less. Nancy adjusted the frame until I was centered. The shadows fell naturally across my face, outlining every wrinkle, every tired vein that still pulsed under my skin. I began speaking, slow, clear, deliberate, like giving testimony to a court where the only judge was my conscience. My name is Stephen Cole. On August 8, 2023, a loan under my name was approved without my consent. The voice on that recording is not mine. I believe it was artificially generated. I held up each piece of evidence: the crossed-out deed, the bank email, the mortgage update. Nancy recorded everything. Not a breath, not a pause missed. Halfway through, she whispered, "Are you scared?" I looked straight into the lens. No. Because fear is what they count on. And I didn't raise my son to win by lying. She lowered the camera slowly, eyes softening. "Keep talking, Mr. Cole. I'll send this to Richard. Call it a witness to the living." When we finished, I sat there for a moment. The air felt heavy, thick enough to touch. Only the tick of her kitchen clock broke the silence each second, sounding like a countdown to justice. Nancy transferred the file to a small USB stick, slipped it into my palm. "I don't know if this will make you feel better," she said, "but at least now you've taken your voice back." I looked at the tiny black drive resting in my hand, a few grams of plastic, a few gigabytes of truth. But it was more than evidence. It was identity. Something that couldn't be forged because I'd said it myself. And that night I sat by the window of my rented room. The city lights shimmered on the river below, breaking into trembling lines on the water's surface. In the dark, the fake voice still echoed in my head. "This is Stephen Cole. I agree to the refinance." I closed my eyes. The words were almost convincing, but almost doesn't carry truth. Eleanor's voice returned to me from a long time ago, the night she helped me record a speech for my first lecture. "Your voice," she'd said, "is the first thing that makes you real. Don't ever let anyone take it from you." Now I finally understood what she meant. When they tried to imitate my voice, they weren't just stealing sound. They were trying to erase the man who once taught them how to tell the truth. I opened my laptop, attached the video, typed one line in the email to Richard. "If justice still breathes, I'll make sure it finds its voice." Then I hit send. Outside, the wind rose again, the same sound that once kept me awake with loneliness. But this time, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded alive, like the beginning of a fight. In a world where even voices can be stolen, the truth doesn't live in what people hear. It lives in what they still have the courage to say. 3 days later, the rain returned to Portland. The sky was low and heavy, the wind lashing against the glass, carrying the damp smell of wet leaves and rust. I sat in my small rental apartment, overlooking the Willamette River, barely 30 square meters, but clean, quiet, and most importantly, mine. On the table, a neat stack of folders, Nancy's USB drive glowing with a soft blue light, and a cup of black coffee steaming faintly, the only warmth left on a morning cold enough to bite through bone. Then came the sound. 3 knocks. Heavy. Measured. The kind of knock I'd heard for decades in my years at the Department of Justice. I stood up. When I opened the door, a uniformed officer stood under the rainwater beating on his shoulders, his badge catching the dim light. Harlow David, Portland PD. Mr. Stephen Cole. Yes. He nodded politely, his voice calm and procedural. Sir, we received a report filed by one David Cole. He claims you removed property from a shared residence without consent. I didn't react. Didn't flinch. I simply smiled, not because I was surprised, but because the game had finally moved to the board I knew best. Come in, I said. The room was small, lit by a single warm lamp. Stacks of white paper glowed faintly on the table like pieces of uncut truth. I gestured for him to sit, then placed the black briefcase in front of us. I think you should see this before we go any further. I opened it carefully, pulling out each page as if building a case in slow motion. The $180,000 transfer record from Eleanor's life insurance, the original deed, with my verified signature, the bank correspondence, and the printed transcript of the forged audio file. For several minutes, Harlow said nothing. He read line by line, his reflection shifting in his glasses as he went. I watched his posture change, skepticism softening into recognition, then into something close to respect. When he finally lowered the last page, I spoke softly. That's all of it. If you need further verification, contact Richard Bennett, attorney formerly with Multnomah County. Harlow looked up, one brow raised. You worked for the State Department of Justice, didn't you? I nodded. 30 years. Internal Affairs. Now I'm just an old man using old skills to stay standing. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Then you already know this. Nothing here points to criminal theft. What I see is a civil dispute ownership finance possible forgery. No arrest will be made. I inclined my head slightly. Thank you, Sergeant. I used to tell my law students justice doesn't always live inside a courtroom. But sometimes, it still knocks at the right door. He looked around the small apartment, then back at me. Mr. Cole, he said quietly. I've seen hundreds of family disputes over property and inheritance. Most end with shouting or worse. But you've kept your calm. I wish my father had that kind of composure. The words caught me off guard. Something about their simplicity carried weight. In that gray morning, they warmed me more than the coffee beside us. I nodded slowly. Thank you, Sergeant. You just reminded me some sons still know how to respect what they don't yet understand. Harlow closed the folder gently, made a brief note in his book, and stood. I'll record this as verified documentation. If they contact you again, call me directly. Justice isn't always fast, but it still exists so long as someone patient enough keeps it breathing. He turned to leave. The door shut behind him with a soft click, a simple sound, but to me it was the gavel's echo of a quiet verdict, not guilty. I sat back down, opened the window. Cold air swept in, smelling of river water and wet steel. On the table, the police memo Harlow had left was spotted with rain. I touched it lightly. For the first time in months, I felt the texture of something that believed me. I whispered to the empty room I thought I'd only lost a family. But now I know what they could never take was my calm in the face of truth. I organized the files once more, every sheet squared, every staple firm. On the cover of the black case, I wrote in careful block letters, verified by law enforcement, Nov 2024. A small line of ink, but enough to turn every accusation against me into dust. My phone buzzed. A message from Richard. Good. Keep everything sealed. We're filing the countersuit. I read it twice. Then set the phone down, exhaling slow. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to pale, a soft gray light spilling across the room. In the reflection of the window, I saw my own face, older, worn, but steady. I took the last sip of my coffee. Bitter, warm, real. They say the law can't protect the gentle. Maybe they're right. But I was never gentle, just silent. And in that silence, I've taken back the first thing they ever stole from me, my faith in myself. They say, if you want to know who your family truly is, wait until the day you're in court and see who's sitting on the other side. That morning, Portland was covered in fog. Streetlights glowed dim and yellow, their reflections bending in the wet sheen of Yamhill Street. I woke before sunrise. Cold coffee, a worn-out suit, shoes that had walked through more years than I cared to count. Everything about me was old, except one thing, the reason I was about to walk into the Multnomah County Courthouse. My son had sued me. $10,000 for emotional damages. A number too small to buy back trust, but just large enough to prove how far he'd fallen. I stood before the mirror, tightening my tie. The reflection staring back looked 10 years older than the last time I'd truly looked. And I whispered to it, this isn't about winning. It's about giving the truth a place to stand. The courtroom was small, paneled wood-stale coffee in the air, a place where justice always arrived one cup late. Across the aisle sat David Gray, suit, straight posture, eyes locked on the bench like a man rehearsing remorse. Beside him, Laura in dark glasses scrolling her phone, probably crafting a caption for her next video, the day my father betrayed us. I entered quietly. Neither of them looked back, but I didn't need their eyes anymore. I'd learned long ago silence can be louder than any greeting. The clerk's voice cut through the air, civil case number 2083. David Cole versus Stephen Cole. Then the door opened. The judge entered. Evan Hayes. I knew that name. He'd once been a law intern under my supervision at the State Department of Justice. Back then I wrote his first recommendation letter, and now he held the gavel between me and my son. The world is small, but sometimes justice takes the long way home, Mr. David Cole, the judge began, you're the plaintiff. Proceed. David rose. His voice was steady on the surface, but I caught the tremor underneath. Your Honor, my father removed property from our shared home without consent, causing emotional and reputational harm to me and my family. His lawyer, young hair slicked to a mirror shine, stood to add, we also have evidence showing Mr. Stephen Cole used private materials to exert psychological pressure on my client. I said nothing. I'd grown used to false accusations. But there was something in my son's tone that cut deep, a familiar rhythm. It sounded exactly like my own voice years ago, when I fought to defend those I believed were innocent. Now that same cadence was being used against me. When my turn came, I stood. No notes, no counsel to speak for me. Your Honor, I began, I don't deny taking what belonged to me. Every item I removed was paid for, documented, and accounted. Perhaps the only thing I truly took was the illusion of a son who thought he could sell his father's dignity. The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Evan's eyes lifted to meet mine. Mr. Cole, the court acknowledges your evidence. Defense, proceed. Richard rose. His hair was grayer, his voice still sharp as a blade. Your Honor, my client is the victim of identity and voice forgery. We submit the forged bank recording provided by Oregon State Bank. He gestured to the technician. The speakers crackled. Then came the voice to, this is Stephen Cole. I agree to the refinance. It was my voice down to the breath, the rasp, the rhythm. And yet, soulless. Richard gave another nod. The next clip played Nancy's recording. On screen, me sitting in her kitchen, speaking slowly, firmly, no script, no performance. That voice is not mine. I did not sign. I did not borrow. I'm just reclaiming my name. Two voices, real and fake, echoed side by side, then stopped, leaving behind a silence thick enough to taste. Laura's head dropped. David looked away, a flicker of sweat gathering at his collar. Judge Hayes leaned forward, voice lower, measured. The first sample shows machine frequency anomalies. That is a voice forgery. The defense evidence stands. I turned to look at my son. He avoided my gaze. In that moment, he didn't look like a man. He looked like a child, terrified of what he'd become. Some children, I thought, aren't born to love their fathers. They're born to teach them how to let go. Evan rested his hands together, his tone shifting half judge, half student again. I remember years ago, a man once told me something before I joined the bar. He said, "Law isn't for punishment. It's a reminder to keep your promises to yourself." That man was you, Mr. Cole. He paused, then looked from me to David. And today I believe you kept that promise. If justice still exists, it's sitting in this courtroom right now. He lifted the gavel. 3 sharp strikes split the silence like thunder. Judgment. Mr. Stephen Cole acted within his legal rights. All property removed is verified as personally owned. No grounds for civil or criminal liability. Case dismissed. The sound of the final strike lingered. People rose. David did not. He sat with his head bowed, fingers laced, as though praying to something he no longer believed in. Laura finally looked at me. Her smile was thin, bitter, trembling. "You won," she said softly. "But who needs you now?" Light from the tall windows fell across my face, half in brightness, half in shadow. Like justice and humanity always coexisting, never quite merging. I looked at her and said quietly, "I don't need anyone to know I was right." Then I turned and walked away. Each step on the wooden floor sounded like a clock marking the end of a long era. The hallway stretched long and pale. Fluorescent light pooled in patches on the marble. Strangers stood by the benches whispering. That old man. He actually won. I didn't turn, didn't slow down. I simply opened the door, and the cold air met me head on, smelling of metal, of freedom, and of a man who had finally kept his own name. Behind me, a voice called out, "Mr. Cole." I turned. Judge Hayes stood by the door, hand extended. "The man who once taught me the value of truth," he said softly, "has just reminded me that justice still matters." I shook his hand, old fingers, steady grip, and for the first time that day I felt something close to peace. Because in that handshake I realized it wasn't me who won. It was the truth itself. Justice isn't a gavel or a courtroom. It's the moment a father stands not to demand money, but to reclaim the name his own son tried to steal. Outside the courthouse, a gust of wind tore through the bulletin board. A loose paper drifted down, a weathered notice stamped in red foreclosure. I picked it up, folded it, slipped it into my pocket. As I stepped down the marble steps, the winter sun broke through for the first time in weeks, catching the silver of my hair. They forged my voice to steal a house. I used my real one to make justice speak again. 1 week after the trial. Portland woke to a mist so light, it looked like the air itself was sighing. From my window, I watched cars slide past Morrison Avenue, their headlights smudged by drizzle and distance. The city felt like it was finally exhaling the quiet that comes not after victory, but after truth has finally spoken. On the table before me lay the Oregon Chronicle ink, still fresh pages, smelling faintly of morning and judgment. The headline stretched bold across half the front page: Retired attorney outsmarts his own son in property fraud case. Below it, a photo of me, dark suit, gray hair, haloed by light, as I left the courthouse, half bowing, half breaking free. The caption read, Stephen Cole, former Oregon Department of Justice investigator, exposed a property forgery scheme orchestrated by his own son. I read every word slowly. No pride, no joy. Just a quiet hollowness, like justice had returned what was mine but taken something else I could never replace. The phone buzzed. Richard Bennett. I assume you've seen the paper, he rasped, his voice a mix of pride and exhaustion. I have, I said. Well, Portland's seen it too. They're calling you the last steadfast father of the analog age. I chuckled once. I'm not steadfast, Richard. I just refuse to die quietly. He laughed, a smoker's laugh frayed around the edges. Either way, you won. And Laura, she's in trouble. Check this out. I opened the laptop. A video filled the screen, one of Laura's old live streams dug up from over a year ago. She was sitting in that polished designer kitchen, champagne glass in hand, lips red, eyes bright, voice dripping confidence. Finally, peace without the old man. That smile, her trademark, now marked the end of her career. Comments poured like rain beneath it. She laughed at the man who raised her. Karma doesn't miss. She lost followers. He regained honor. Fair trade. The internet roared. Sponsors dropped her. Collaborations vanished overnight. Every brand statement began the same way. We do not condone disrespect toward family or elders. I watched her frozen smile on the paused frame. Still beautiful, but empty, like a mask left behind after the play ends. At the same moment, an email from Richard blinked in subject: IRS opens investigation. Cole Realty LLC federal auditors just opened an inquiry into David Cole's company, citing irregularities in their 2023 tax filings. I leaned back in the chair. Didn't sigh. Didn't smile. Just felt everything settling exactly where it belonged. Another message followed, shorter this time. Karma keeps its own calendar, Steve. Never early, never late. I typed back, slow and steady. I don't need to see them hurt, Richard. I just need them to stop hurting me. That afternoon, I walked the old neighborhood, the one that used to be ours. The house still stood, beige, paint-quiet porch, but now a for sale sign leaned tiredly in the yard. Grass overgrown, curtains drawn. A house that looked like it was waiting to forget its own name. Nancy was on her porch, newspaper in hand. She waved. Steve, I saw it, they're selling the place. I know, I said. She's hated all over town now, Nancy continued. Ad agencies won't touch her. She's blacklisted statewide. I nodded silently. She studied my face. You feeling better? I smiled faintly. Better not because they fell, but because I stopped believing I was wrong for trusting justice. She smiled too, but softer. You always said karma doesn't knock with fists. I nodded. It doesn't. It just opens the door people lock from the inside. That night, Portland shimmered under gold streetlights. I sat by the window with the old radio humming a slow jazz tune, Eleanor's favorite. On the table lay a faded photo, Cannon Beach, 1992. She was laughing, wind tangling her hair, sunlight caught in her eyes. I remembered her voice one day: truth will speak for itself if you don't lie to yourself first. I whispered back as if she were still in the chair beside me. You were right, Eleanor. The truth finally stood on its own. The next morning, another headline ran: Oregon Chronicle. Special report. Social fallout influencer. Faces backlash after disrespecting elderly father-in-law. They told Laura's story, once 500,000 followers, now all gone. Sponsors withdrawn. Events cancelled. Her personal accounts locked. Public comments named her the modern face of ingratitude. Then Richard called again, his voice quieter now. They froze David's business accounts. IRS will seize assets unless he proves legitimate income. I listened, then answered in a near whisper. Justice collects its debts, Richard. We just have to wait. He chuckled, weary. God. Steve, you never change. Even when you win, you sound like a man teaching class again. I smiled. Because I'm not seeking revenge. I'm just restoring balance. That evening, a message arrived from Judge Evan Hayes. Mr. Cole, I wanted to thank you again. Your case reminded many of us in law why we began this work. I quoted your words today at the University of Oregon Law School. Justice isn't about winning. It's about not losing yourself. I sat back, closed my eyes, and smiled. Eleanor would have been proud. There are battles without gunfire, only patience, and verdicts not read in court, but in the conscience of those who forgot who they owed. Portland glowed beneath a haze of light mist. Across the Willamette, the bridges shimmered like strings of gold. The Chronicle lay folded on my table, the last visible words catching the lamp's glow. Justice served. Karma delivered. I lifted my cup of tea, cold now bitter, and stared into the quiet. Somewhere between reflection and peace, I whispered to the woman I'd loved to all the years that had built me, you see, Eleanor. We never had to win. We just had to stay right. The last light of day spilled across my face, old-lined but calm. It glinted off the rim of the teacup onto the faint engraving, worn by time. Truth never retires. I smiled once more. Karma never needed my help. It just needed me to stay silent at the right moment. Early autumn 2025. The sky above Oregon looked washed clean, a quiet blue that belonged to people who had already survived their storms. Morning light brushed across the highway to Beaverton, and the trees along the edge of town bowed in the wind like they were greeting a man who'd finally come home to peace. That was the day I moved into Riverstone Residences, a retirement community, with manicured gardens, stone pathways that glistened after rain, and the soft hum of life that wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Riverstone was built for those who had lived enough, lost enough, and wanted nothing more than to hear birds instead of arguments, whined instead of gossip, and the sound of their own breath without fear. My room was small but honest. A single window overlooked a rose garden, just beginning to turn gold. On the nightstand sat my old black briefcase, a folded copy of the Chronicle's special edition, and a photograph of Eleanor. She was smiling, that soft, knowing smile that could still light a dark room more than any bulb ever invented. Sometimes I caught myself talking to her photo the way one talks to the quiet after a storm, half grateful, half haunted. Later that morning, the director came by. Laura Simmons, mid-50s, quick stride, kind eyes that had seen too much to judge anyone. Mr. Cole, she said warmly, I read about your case. We run weekend workshops here, little sessions about life skills and stories. Would you ever consider teaching one, maybe something about the law? I almost laughed. The law for retirees. She smiled. No. For people who've been retired by the world, but still deserve their rights. That silence between us said more than agreement ever could. All right, I said finally. But I don't teach statutes anymore. I'll teach self-respect. A week later, the first class began. The community room on the third floor was simple wooden chairs, sunlight dripping through the windows, dust floating like memory. 10 residents sat in a loose circle, a retired teacher with careful posture, 2 former engineers who still argued about bridges, a nurse who kept humming the rhythm of hospital monitors, and one man wearing a worn Vietnam vet pin hands, trembling slightly as he poured tea. I didn't bring notes, didn't bring a laptop, just myself and a small porcelain cup still steaming with green tea. I'm not here to teach you the law I began. The law changes with time, with politics, with whoever has the louder microphone. But one thing doesn't: the strength of whoever chooses to keep it even when they have to stand alone. A woman asked, why would keeping it make someone lonely? I looked at her for a moment. Because I knew. Because the law is only strong, I said slowly, when the person who guards it isn't afraid to be alone with it. Silence filled the room, a heavy, respectful kind. Outside, the willow branches bent and whispered a sound like time breathing. Across the valley, David sat in his car in front of our old house in Lake Oswego. A red sign pierced the front lawn: foreclosure property seized by IRS. He didn't get out, just stared. The home that once made him feel powerful now looked smaller than his guilt. An officer taped a seal across the door. Old bills swirled up in the wind and flew down the street like confessions nobody wanted to read. David gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. In the rearview mirror, his face glistened with sweat, a 41-year-old man staring at himself without any lies left to hide behind. And in that mirror, somewhere between fear and realization, I hope he finally saw me not as an obstacle, but as the man he'd tried to erase and couldn't. Across town, Laura sat alone in a rented apartment. White walls, no laughter, just the flicker of a laptop screen. Emails lined the inbox like epitaphs, termination notice. Partnership voided. Brand ambassador contract canceled. Her cursor hovered over one last button: delete channel. The prompt appeared: are you sure you want to permanently remove your account? She stared at the words as if they might forgive her. And for a single heartbeat, she remembered the old man in the kitchen, the smell of paint, the sound of my voice saying, "Give it time, Laura. Paint needs to breathe before it shines." One tear dropped onto the keyboard. She clicked yes. The screen went black, and for the first time in her life, so did the noise. Return to Riverstone. Later that morning, one of the residents asked me, "Mr. Cole, do you ever feel justice comes too late?" I smiled. The kind of smile that comes from scars, not teeth. Justice doesn't come late, I said. It just waits. It waits for people calm enough not to lose themselves before they meet it. The room stayed still. Then soft clapping rose, not loud, not forced, just enough to say, "We understand." For the first time in years, I believed them. After class, Laura Simmons caught me in the hall. Her voice carried the quiet admiration of someone who'd just seen proof that decency could still teach. "You were wonderful, Mr. Cole. They want you to teach more often." I smiled. I'm not sure they learned much, but I learned to speak again without needing to defend myself. She laughed, then left me standing by the window. Outside, tulips had started to bloom red as forgiveness, bright as the courage it takes to start over. And for the first time in a long time, I thought of Eleanor without pain. There are springs, I realized, that only arrive after you've stopped clinging to winter. That afternoon, an email arrived from a young reporter at the Chronicle. "Mr. Cole, we're writing a follow-up piece on your case. Many readers call you the embodiment of calm justice. Would you like to comment?" I stared at the words for a long time. Calm justice. 2 simple words carrying the weight of everything I'd learned. Justice didn't roar. It whispered. It didn't demand victory. It asked for patience. I replied, no statement, just this. Justice never leaves anyone. It only waits until the shouting stops, so someone can finally hear it. Then after a pause, I added one line, not for them, but for me. The greatest revenge isn't making someone fall. It's standing tall so quietly that they have to look down to see themselves. Later, I sat in the common room. A group of seniors laughed over coffee. A woman played an off-key waltz on the upright piano. The air smelled of cinnamon rolls and peace. I sat in the last row, hands wrapped around my tea, watching sunlight spill through the wide glass window. It struck my face soft, forgiving gold. And I realized that after everything, the courts, the betrayal, the noise, silence no longer scared me. It felt like freedom. Justice isn't far. It was never gone. It's been waiting here all along, patient, quiet, until someone calm enough remembers who they are. A month later. Portland rested beneath a thin veil of early winter fog, the kind that softened the outlines of everything: buildings, bridges, even memories. Each morning I woke before sunrise, not out of habit, but because I didn't want to miss the moment the city woke with me. When the first light spilled across the fir trees and touched the still surface of Beaverton Lake, I realized something simple and heavy and true. I was still here, no longer angry, no longer chasing justice, just breathing quietly in the calm I had bought with half a lifetime. My small room at Riverstone Residences was neat, warm, and filled with a kind of silence that no longer frightened me. On the table sat 2 cups, one for me, and one left empty. Not for anyone expected to return, but for the memories that never truly left. I reheated the vegetable soup, poured tea into the porcelain cup Eleanor had chosen from an antique shop back in 2002. The cup was cracked along its rim, a fine, thin scar I never wanted to mend. Because some cracks aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to remind you you're still here. On the table lay a beige envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just a few uneven words written by hand to Dad. The receptionist had said, "A middle-aged man dropped it off, didn't leave a name." I didn't ask. I didn't need to. I rested my hand on it cold. The same kind of cold I'd felt the last time I shook David's hand outside the courthouse. I knew what might be inside, maybe an apology, maybe guilt disguised as money. But I didn't open it. Not out of fear, but because I no longer needed to know. Some stories deserve to end in silence. By noon, soft sunlight filtered through the curtains, laying quiet stripes of gold across the floor. A knock came 3 times, light but certain. When I opened the door, a young woman stood there, holding a basket of pumpkin bread. Beside her was Lucas, the boy I'd met at Riverstone's reading club, the boy with eyes so clear they seemed untouched by all the darkness adults create. Lucas wanted to bring these himself, the teacher said, smiling. Our class baked for Thanksgiving week. I bent down, taking the basket. Thank you, my boy. They smell wonderful. Lucas grinned. Dad says people only say thank you when they mean it. So, are you happy, Mr. Cole? I smiled back, a quiet, tired smile that somehow felt warm again. Yes, I am. And thank you for reminding me how to mean it. They stayed a while. The teacher chatted about the school garden. Lucas fiddled with the pen on my table, then looked up and asked Mr. Cole, "Why are there 2 cups, but only one has tea?" I followed his gaze. The sunlight glinted off the empty cup. That one, I said softly, is for someone I still like to talk to. He nodded, thoughtful, and then said something that pierced the air like a quiet blade. Dad has a cup like that too. Mom says he keeps it because he hurt someone and wants to remember to be better. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I didn't ask which cup or who he meant. I didn't need to. I simply answered, "Then remember this, Lucas. Don't ever let your cup stay empty for the same reason your father's did." He nodded again, as if he understood more than his age should allow. When they left, he turned at the door, waved, and said, "Goodbye, Mr. Cole." I smiled, voice raspy but steady. "Goodbye, Lucas. Thank you for bringing the light with you." The door closed. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't hollow. It was warm like the air after rain. I sat again by the table. The envelope caught the sunlight, its edge glowing faintly gold. Maybe inside was everything David couldn't say for 10 years. Maybe it was empty, just a folded silence of its own. I didn't open it. I placed it in the drawer beside the wedding photo of Eleanor and me. Not to hide it, but to let it rest. Because not every door deserves to be opened again. Later I went out to the tulip garden. Most flowers were gone now, but the soil was still warm beneath my shoes, and the air carried that faint sweetness of something once loved, still refusing to fade. I sat on the old wooden bench, hands wrapped around the teacup, watching the sun bleed into the lake. In the distance, 2 old men played chess, their laughter echoing softly across the garden like the ticking of time itself. And I whispered to no one in particular. Maybe justice isn't in the courtroom after all. Maybe it's right here in a quiet afternoon where no one's lying and the tea's still warm. Back inside, the radio hummed. "Good evening, Oregon. 2 weeks until Thanksgiving. Wherever you are, may you find peace." I smiled. Whoever wrote that line must have known someone like Eleanor. Her voice echoed in my memory. "You did it, Stephen. Not by winning, but by letting go." I looked out the window. A flock of geese crossed the sky in a perfect V heading south, proof that even leaving can be a kind of honesty. "I don't need apologies anymore," I said quietly. "I only need peace. Some wounds aren't meant to heal, they're just meant to stop bleeding." Back at my desk, I unfolded the old Oregon Chronicle. The ink had faded, but the headline was still there: "Justice served. Karma delivered." I picked up my pen and with an unsteady but deliberate hand wrote beneath it, "And silence became freedom." I stared at the line for a long time, and for the first time in years, I wasn't writing to prove anything, only to say goodbye. "People think revenge is about fairness," I whispered. "But when you stop seeking revenge, you take yourself back. Freedom doesn't come from victory. It comes from the kind of silence that no longer needs to hate." On the table, 2 cups, one full, one empty. The hallway light spilled softly into the room. Curtains swayed in the evening breeze, carrying the scent of tea and dried flowers. Outside, the lake mirrored the fading sun. Bridges gleamed faintly through the mist, and the city looked like a memory reflected back at itself. The radio played one last time. This is Oregon Public Radio, from Beaverton to Portland. Happy early Thanksgiving to all who found peace again. I placed my hand gently on Eleanor's photo and whispered, "You see my love." In the end, even silence knows how to speak. If you believe that respect means more than blood hit, leave a comment to tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories where justice doesn't shout, it simply stands still long enough for us to hear it. Because sometimes silence is the strongest way to say, "I've had enough."